Hello everyone, in this video we're going to talk about the conclusion of engineering ethics. So everything that we've done thus far has been to talk about engineering ethics and the import thereof. Engineering ethics at first glance might seem like something simple. Should we do this thing? Should we do that thing? But it's not that simple. What is right and what is wrong is not as easy as we would always think. We spent the first half of the semester talking about the particular kinds of views wherein we can discuss what is right and what is not, what is right and what is wrong, with various kinds of meta-ethical perspectives: deontology, utilitarianism, ethical egoism, and so on. So saying that something is right or something is wrong is more difficult than we might imagine, and then putting it in particular contexts and saying, is it right that we build this bridge? Is it right for us to improve on infrastructure? Is it right for us to propagate broadband access to everyone? All those kinds of questions are still ethical questions now. Their rightness and their wrongness is not obvious to us. It might feel obvious, but hopefully one of the things you got out of the first half of this course was that the feeling of rightness or wrongness is not equivalent to rightness or wrongness itself. Furthermore, in the second half of the course, we talked about the notion of belief when we were talking about truth, truthfulness, bullshit. Is it right to do this thing? Is it right to believe something without sufficient evidence? Clifford says no. James says maybe. Frankfurt tells us more about bullshit. A kind of deception that's not the same thing as nonsense. It's not the same thing as lying as such. It's not the same thing as humbug. But nevertheless, we have these notions of not quite rightness. And so, for those of you who are going to be engineers, I want you to hearken unto these ethical peculiarities. That's not to say that one thing or the other is right or wrong in ethics. Again, it depends on the perspective. It depends on the meta-ethical perspective and view. Maybe it depends on the context of what's going on. But we know, this much we know, that sometimes something happens where we can look at it and say, this should not have happened. Might be an oil spill. Might be a bridge collapse. Might be the way in which we distribute a vaccine. It might be the way in which we advertise ourselves on the internet. It might be the way in which we don't consider the consequences of something. Maybe the consequences of some sort of social connection, liable to all kinds of inversion, deception. When Facebook, for example, is just people talking to their friends, sharing photos, that's one thing. But when it becomes a domain in which the dissemination of false information flourishes, it's something altogether different. When Twitter becomes the realm of pithy statements that are funny, and the explication of memes, great. But when it finds itself to be within the atmosphere of the preponderance of alternative facts, it is no longer a benign entity, but a malevolent or perhaps a malignant one. Ethics isn't easy. And I don't just mean the study of ethics. That's something unto itself. But figuring out the right thing to do, that has never been easy, and it never will be easy. I think despite various ethical traditions trying to tell us about the obviousness of the right thing to do, it never quite is. Even when it's obvious of what is right, it is never easy to figure out what we're supposed to, either to figure out what we're supposed to do, or to act in accordance with what we believe is the right thing to do. And when we're dealing with ethics as an academic discipline, there things seem very easy. This stuff is right, this stuff is wrong. Right? You shouldn't kill, but you know what you should do? You should be kind to people. Those kinds of things seem easy. But when it comes to applied versions of ethics, business ethics, computer ethics, engineering ethics, all of a sudden these disciplines seem hard mainly because of what we have to do. Should we really have to do X, Y, or Z? The financial crisis of a decade ago occurred because people in business ethics were not doing as they ought with subprime mortgages, inter alia. A century ago, the stock market crashed because people were not doing what they ought with stocks. We can say that definitively. We can say today when various social media companies and software companies find themselves before Congress, they are usually on the defensive, trying to say, no, we can do this thing. We can have a monopoly. We can take information. We can ignore disinformation. Can they? Should they? Question, sure. But the discipline of ethics gives us the apparatus by which to at least analyze these kinds of problems appropriately. I spent the first half of the course introducing you to some theoretical apparatuses and dispositions. I spent the second half of the course talking about a particular set of issues when it comes to epistemology, or how we know what we know, aspects of truth, truthiness, and even bullshit. Now, one might ask, what does any of this have to do with engineering? How does this help me build stuff? Well, all of the building stuff, constructing stuff, conceiving stuff ought to be in the atmosphere of, is this right? And if it's not, it leaves us liable to all kinds of problems, not just social ones, not just psychological ones, not just mathematical ones, but it leaves us to problems much deeper than that. It can bring us to ethical problems. Is this right? Should we build this thing is different from can we build this thing? It's a different kind of question. But this is the kind of question that we see ourselves dealing with in engineering ethics. And even if we can build something, and even if we say we should build something, does that mean it will persist? What will happen afterwards? Ethics makes us tangle with the question of the fact that we're never merely complete with something at the moment that it's done. Because something's not done, it persists. So can we build a bridge? Sure, yeah, we did it. Will it stay up is a different question. Can we make it stay up is another. Is it okay for us to deal with certain kinds of loss? You know what? We've built so many bridges and so many people died in them falling down. Is that okay? Is that a sufficient amount of damage? Those kinds of questions are not merely mathematical. They're not merely engineering questions, but they are ethical questions when it comes to matters of should and ought. And that's why we saw halfway through the semester engineers, not ethicists, engineers dealing with how ought we constitute ourselves with a code of conduct. How ought we conduct ourselves? How ought we be? And there were very strict parameters to the case. And we analyze in the midterm how some things ought to be and how some things ought not to be. But then as we delved into the second half of the semester, we came to deal with problems of truth. Truth, what we know, and what we ought to do. Is it the case that we ought never believe anything without sufficient evidence? We find that's a difficult question, and we find it's a difficult supposition. It sounds good. Do we never believe anything without sufficient evidence? Yeah, in this modern world we should. We shouldn't believe in ghosts or spirits or something like that because there's not sufficient evidence, but how many things do we believe without sufficient evidence? And upon some introspection, we might believe a lot. Which is part of the reason why William James says, you know what? It needs to be something more specific than that. It needs to be a particular kind of genuine option if we really care about making that kind of supposition. But then other times, there's things that we say that matter, whether it be truth, truthiness, or bullshit. Much of what we say is not just indicative of how we feel or how we believe, but what we say can make things happen, especially when we find ourselves in positions of authority to make things happen. And that's what not just engineering is about, but not what ethics is about, but what engineering ethics is about. So, since we've gotten a semester in, we've had a lot to do. What I want to do here in the remainder of what we've got in the remainder of this video is discuss how to do your final exam, what there is to do and what you need to be prepared to do. So let's do that. Okay, for the final exam, what we need to do is, first of all, we need to go to assignments, and then we'll see final exam. And then you'll notice there's 4 things here. So let's talk about these things one by one. You do not actually have to do all of these things, but let's talk about them. First of all, there's the objective content. In the objective content, I'll go and tell you, if you click on this, it's due by May 3rd. And for the objective content, there are 15 multiple choice fill-in-the-blank questions that are due by May 3rd. All about the content that we've done since the midterm. This is something that is mandatory. You must do this stuff. So you click on it. It'll say it's due by May 3rd. As soon as you click begin, you'll have those 15 questions. Those 15 questions are each worth 4 points each, for a total of 60% of the final exam. And then you have 2 options. There's 40% remaining of the final exam, and you have 2 options of what you can do from here. So you can do one of 2 things. Let's talk about the first option. The first option is you can do 2 of the essay questions, which are here. Final exam option 1-1 and final exam option 1-2. What you'll do here is, like the midterm, you will answer various questions in a short answer format. I said the ideal length is the length of a celebrity apology. So here's what those are. There are 3. So if I click on this here, the document, it'll bring this up. There's these 3 questions here. Each one of these is worth 20% should you choose to do them. Here they are. Let's look at these. The first one says this: what are the 4 dimensions of the prima facie ambiguous notion of responsibility? Compare and contrast these 4 notions. How are they all dimensions that fall under a singular concept of responsibility, yet how are they each distinct from one another? Further, how do these conceptualizations come into play in the realm of job, causal, and legal responsibility within engineering ethics? That's option number 1. This is worth 20% of the exam, should you choose to do it. Option 2. William Clifford maintains that one ought never to believe anything without sufficient evidence, whereas William James contends that there are occasions wherein a genuine option of belief is permissible despite not possessing apodictic certainty. In your view, do you side with Clifford, with James, with a mediated synthesis of the 2 views, or do you suppose neither view is sustainable? What is the application of this dispute in the domain of engineering ethics? So what I'm asking you to do here at this point is, how does what Clifford and James have to say deal with engineering ethics? So you have these 3 options here, and these 3 options are each worth 20%. You can do 2 of them and they're each worth 20%. that's something that you could do. So the objective aspect of the exam is mandatory. The objective aspect is worth 60% of your grade. Then you could do 2 of these essay questions, each worth 20% a pop, and that would also fulfill your exam. But also, you'll notice there's option 2. The objective aspect is mandatory. However, the options that we just went over are elective. Instead of doing these 2 options, you could do this other option. And this other option is as follows. I've opened it up here. You can see it here in Blackboard. What you'll do here is the following. You will take a particular incident within the domain of engineering ethics. I don't care what it is. Something that's happened that you can analyze in the following way with the particular strictures herein. You'll look at something that's happened within the domain of engineering and you'll itemize the following. So it says this. Instructions for option 2, simply fill in the relevant information below. Cite any and all sources with regard to the Chicago Manual of Style, where you employ any allusions, paraphrases, or quotations, including any factual data. So look for some incident that you can analyze within the domain of engineering ethics. It could be the Challenger explosion. It could be some oil spill. It could be some other incident, some bridge collapse. Look for some particular incident that you'd like to analyze within the domain of engineering ethics and do the following. Basically, fill out this chart, and this will count for 40% of your final grade should you choose to do it. So you can do either this 40% option, analyzing some incident, or 2 of the essay questions that we already talked about. The objective component must be done, period. So in here, here's what you'll do. You'll name what it is. What is it? What's the incident you're talking about? Where did it happen? When did it happen? Who's involved? Describe it. List the ethical problems involved here. List the meta-ethical problems involved here. Utilitarianism, deontology, egoism, and so forth. How do these things come into play? List, if any, concrete real-life consequences, impact of incident or event. What happened as a result of this thing? Specify any institutional agency response to the incident or event. For example, if we're talking about COVID-19, what did the CDC do? For example, if a plane crashed, what did the EPA do? You know, if it involves the FBI, the CIA, the EPA, the FCC, who does it involve? Include that here. And what their statements are. How did they respond to this particular incident? And also list, if any, relevant contextual features or elements. Put some other stuff I need to know about this particular incident. For this final exam, you need to do 2 of 3 things. 1, you must do the objective content. 2, you can do the essay questions. There's 3 available. You'll choose 2 of them. Each of them are worth 20% of your grade. Or, for this final exam, thereafter, you have 2 things you can do. You can either do 2 of the essay questions, of which there are 3 available, each worth 20%. Or, instead of doing those 2 essay options, you can do this third option, wherein you will take a particular incident within the domain of engineering ethics and you will analyze it within the domain of engineering ethics, and you will analyze it with the parameters that I have specified in the question for option 2. And so you have a bit of flexibility here. I don't care which you do. You can do the essay questions or you can do the case analysis. That's entirely up to you. Wherein you will apply the notions that you've learned into a particular case analysis. So the essay questions each are worth 20%. The case analysis is worth 40%. You can't do mixing and matching from there. So I'm going to go ahead and say that now. You'll do one or the other. That's to say, you'll do the 2 essay questions or you'll do the case analysis. So you've got some flexibility in terms of what you want to do because you must do the objective content. And the objective content is very straightforward. It's all from the stuff on everything that we've done since the midterm. The stuff on truth, truthfulness, responsibility. That's what it's on. Now, this final exam assignment is due May 3rd, 2021. If you have any questions about it, you are welcome to ask me at thomasb@usca.edu. Ask me. You're like, I did this. I have questions about it. Send it to me. I want to get it back to you. But it must be in by the end of day, May 3rd, 2021. That's all I've got for you, everybody. It has been a pleasure doing this course with you in spring 2021. It's been a very different experience, I have to admit. And in the future, I know I've had some of you as students in the past, but I look forward to seeing some of you again as students in the future. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.